had. I mean, may well have won Trump the election.
Well, I don't think that the care that I've taken, let's say, with regards to young men is any different in its essence than the care I take with my son. You know, I like my son. I want the best for him. I think he's great. I encourage him all the time. I like to see him move beyond his zone of comfort out into the world. And then I have all these young men who have been listening to what I've been saying, who are doing the same thing. And it's the best possible thing. I mean, I had a show last night in Westbury, in New York, and afterwards I usually meet somewhere between 60 and 100 people, and many of them are young men, and they come to the show very dressed up, you know. They often buy suits to come to the show, and they're like standing up, and their shoulders are back, and they're looking distinguished, and they've got ambition, and they're thrilled to death because they're doing something worthwhile. And, you know, they shake my hand and they say, you know, thanks for the help. And
yeah, it's
that's
powerful.
Great.
It's powerful.
It's great.
Yeah, and
it's great, man. It's great.
Yes, and I remember the first time I interviewed you, my sons wanted to come and watch that interview. First time. They wanted to be in the room with you because you had had that impact on them. And that I found remarkable too, that you have this real visceral impact on young men who've been really in the last 10 years floundering for their identity and what is acceptable and not acceptable, and what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine.
Yeah, well, I had a good father, Pearson. My father, he died recently. He died about 3 weeks ago, and he was very tough man, very. A hunter, a trapper, a deadly shot, and man with very high standards, and very encouraging. He was really good at that, really good with little kids. And, you know, it's a privilege to play that role for as many people as possible. There isn't anything better than that. And, you know, I think you're right about the fact that that spirit has been kindled around Trump. And, you know, what's so cool to see with Trump is that he's accepted that. He's proved himself willing to share the stage with all of these other remarkable people. And even in some ways, I wouldn't say to fade into the background, because Trump isn't exactly your fade into the background sort of guy. But, you know, the fact that he's invited so willingly these other participants, all of whom are high status people around him, also, to me, put to rest any concerns I had about any pathological narcissism on his part. I mean, obviously, Trump is a very effective self-promoter, and there's something in that that's a real skill. But by the same token, you know, he has RFK, who's a force in his own right. He has Musk, Ramaswamy, Vance. These are formidable people. Tulsi Gabbard as well. That's not the sort of person you surround yourself with if you're a toxic narcissist. Those are the people you surround yourself with if you're out on a quest. And it's so cool to see this. It's so literary. It's absurd.
Jordan, I was going to come to your dad because one of my producers discovered that your father had died several weeks ago and found an obituary. I don't know whether you wrote this obituary. One of the family did. And it talked about dad, so it's one of the three children.
Yes, I wrote it.
It was you. I thought it was. Because I read it and I found it unbelievably moving. I was going to leave it to the end, but since you've mentioned it now, first of all, my deepest condolences on losing a remarkable man. I mean, even if I didn't know the connection, I just read this about somebody, I would think what a remarkable life he had. He had 3 children, 4 grandchildren. He was a great-grandfather to 4 more. He grew up in Norway, in a log cabin. But then, as you said, he lived outdoors, shooting, hunting, bird watching, trapping, cross-country skiing, canoeing. And he was an enthusiastic collector of single-shot rifles. I love this detail, that he loved their simplicity, their design and craftsmanship. More importantly, he loved the precision of these rifles. And he liked the fact that a single-shot rifle only allowed for 1 bullet as a hunter, dead center. And that epitomized to you.
I said, it's because you want to hit the target dead center with 1 shot. And that's like, it's a symbolic representation of your aim in life. And he thought about that. And my dad wasn't particularly metaphysically oriented, and that was an explanation he was entirely satisfied with, right? And you know, the word sin means to miss the mark, right? It means to miss the target. And that's acted out in this, it was acted out in my dad's life in this relationship that he had with guns. And he, as a hunter, it was the same thing. He hunted with a single shot rifle. You got one shot.
That force of nature, was it a sense also of that adventure that you talk about so much in the book? Was he an adventurous man?
Well, he was adventurous in his outdoor life, I would say. You know, my father was a tough man, and so he was the fire chief of the local town as well. And the adventure for him was his ability to prevail. You know, and as you pointed out, the log cabin that he grew up in was actually in Saskatchewan. There he was quite sentimentally attached to it. But he was a pioneer type, my father. You know, and he was great with little kids, great. And he spent a lot of time with me when I was little, a lot. And it made a huge difference to me.
You know, we found a clip. This is you actually interviewing your father several years ago. Let's take a look at this.
I remember driving home with you to Nacum a number of times and talking the whole time because you'd never stop asking questions.
Yeah, well, hasn't changed much. I think I remember mostly when I was a little kid reading with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that was great. That was so much fun.
I thought so.
I can see how moved you are, Jordan, understandably. Obviously,
Pierce, you always make me cry when you.
You know, I knew you might get emotional about this. And I wanted to leave it to the end. It just, when you brought it up, it was so. I found the obituary so powerful, and I said to my producer who found it, this looks to me like Jordan wrote this, and we didn't know, and it's just so beautifully written. I mean, I also know that because you say at the start of it that he was a husband to Beverly Peterson who predeceased him by only 5 months. So you've lost both your parents now in the space of...
Yes, and Tammy lost her father last December too. Yeah, so it's been a brutal year on that front, that's for sure. You know, it's been remarkable watching my wife too, because one of the things she did in the last 15 years was really set her relationship with her father in order and really practiced being grateful for what he had offered to her. And, you know, every family has its complexity. You know, in the story of Noah, to return to the book a minute, as you have no respect for your father, your children will be the servants of slaves forever. And this is a very interesting curse, because what it means is that if you fail to respond to what your ancestors offer you, your father, let's say in particular, with gratitude and love, then you will fail to embody the spirit of your ancestors. And so it was interesting to watch my wife, you know, develop extreme gratitude for what her father had offered her. I really liked, his name was Del Roberts. I really liked Del. He was a bigger than life character, something like Trump on a smaller scale, you know, bombastic and entrepreneurial. And that spirit of the benevolent father, that's associated with divinity, of course, in the biblical texts. And understanding how that spirit transmits itself down the generations is part of what stabilizes society itself. And I was very fortunate, my father, you know, I knew, and my mother as well, my parents were 100% behind the best part of me. Unbelievably useful. And that's something I've been able to offer many people, you know, as, what would you say, an abstract or virtualized father. And so we've found solace in each other, my sister and my brother, and drawn more closely together, and that's been very good. And none of us are naive, you know. I mean, our parents were getting old, and I would say we were also fortunate in some ways. My mother was very vital, right? Literally till the day she died. She had a heart attack, and then 2 days later another, but she was young and vivacious person despite being in her 80s, and then bowed out with no fuss and very suddenly. And my father as well, you know, I mean, I've watched people deteriorate for sometimes decades in old folks' homes, and both my parents departed from life in a relatively, and I have drawn closer to my brother and sister in consequence, and I suspect that will continue.
Did you get the chance to tell your parents how you really felt about them? Obviously, you're brilliant at doing this with other people. Yeah.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I had some conversations, some deep conversations with my dad in the last few months, and certainly let him know how appreciative I was of him, of the attention he paid to me. He knew that, but it never hurts to make it explicit. Tammy also, when we knew that Dad was dying, Tammy also, I mean, I've known my wife since she was 7, and she knew my father very well. We lived across the street, and she always admired him. And one of the things she pointed out about both our parents, or both our fathers, which was very interesting, is that they were both very positive about our relationship. Like, we were friends when we were kids, and my dad loved Tammy. It's the perfect thing to do psychologically, because if you shrink away in consequence of that threat, you live in fear for the rest of your life. And Trump's determination was obviously, no matter what, I won't live in fear. And that's the same decision Job makes, by the way, in the book of Job. It's a decision not to lose faith and not to live in fear, no matter what, right? No matter what. And that is a manifestation of the spirit that is indomitable. And I think that is a reflection of the image of God.
I've got to end with some news that I know would have made them, I'm sure, very, very proud, and will make you very happy, and will make your most savage critics very unhappy, because as we've been talking, your book has moved to #1 in the Amazon bestseller list. You are back where you normally are with your books, Jordan. You're #1. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, sir. And thank you very much for highlighting the obituary. Much appreciated.